Hello everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, From Source to Value, Why Automation is Driving Data Catalog Success. Now this is the second in a three-part series where we dive into augmented data catalogs. If you haven't had a chance to view the first one yet, there's a link to it available in the Attachments tab located below the player window, but you might want to wait until after this one is over. My name is Brett Carpenter, and I'll be your MC for this webcast. I'm excited to introduce our speaker for today's presentation, Matthew Monahan, who is Zalonie's Senior Product Manager. Now, we'll have time to answer your questions at the end of this presentation, so don't hesitate to ask them at any point using the Ask a Question box that's, again, located just below the player window. We'll also have a poll during the webcast, which you can participate in using the Vote tab when prompted. Now, before we begin, though, I'd like to briefly introduce who we are and what we do. At Zalonie, we enable enterprises to leverage their decentralized multi-cloud data environments to gain agility and cost savings while accelerating value from their analytics. The Zalonie Data Platform delivers trusted, high-value data through an augmented catalog, exceptional governance and security, and easy self-service access for all types of users. We work with the world's leading companies, empowering teams using machine learning and an extensible foundation to conquer today's data sprawl challenges. Now with that, I'll turn it over to Matthew to talk about the role automation can play in your data catalog. Matthew?
Thank you. Thank you, Brett. Well, I'm really excited to be here for this second part of the three-part series. And today we're going to talk a lot about automation and how automation in your data pipeline can save you a lot of extra effort and bring everything together. So our agenda for today, we're going to talk about the benefits of a single application over a collection of point solutions. We're going to talk about leveraging automation in your data pipeline for improved metadata quality. And we'll talk about applying right-sized data governance for security and control. So I thought we'd start with this quote, which I find quite interesting. So about 91% of organizations cite people and process challenges as the biggest barriers to becoming data-driven. And I think what that really tells us is that very often it's not the tools that drag us down, it's not technology, but it's getting people to use technology. It's putting the right technology in place so that users can easily accomplish their tasks, but do so in a way that meets the overall business objectives. So from a data analyst or data scientist perspective, they want to get at their data as quickly as possible. But then there's other concerns within the organization around compliance and governance that need to also have their needs met. And so putting the right tools in place will make it easier to have the right people follow the right process and accomplish what you want to do with your data pipeline. But again, we'll come back to this point throughout the conversation that people and process are the largest challenges and the biggest barriers to becoming successful with your data-driven pipelines. So what does a data pipeline look like? Well, in its simplest form, a data pipeline is the path that data follows from the time it initially comes into the organization all the way through to when you're making use of that data, whether you're using it internally or sharing it externally. There's a path that data must follow and a number of activities or actions that happen to the data along the way. So if we take a look at this one example, files come in, and sometimes they're files, and sometimes it's streams of data, sometimes it's new database sources. But those files have to come into some kind of location. And with data lakes, they've traditionally come into a single file system, right? A large Hadoop or HDFS file system. One of the things that we've seen a lot of change in the industry over the past few years has been the idea of rather than collecting all of the data into a single location, instead connecting to it where it exists. But the fact remains is that there's source data that gets generated or brought into your organization at some point, and you need to do something with that data. You need to connect to it or collect it, but then you need to capture metadata. You need to understand what that data is that you're bringing in. There are a number of workflows that will take place that will enhance, refine, improve, or manage that data. You may have data quality checks that ensure that the data meets your expectations as it comes in. That's especially important for data that's brought in from outside of the organization. You may profile the data, get a very basic understanding of what types of information are presented or aggregate information about the data. You may perform data governance tasks such as tokenization or data masking to ensure that the right people only see the right amount of information. You may start to do some data prep, such as joining multiple data sets together. You want to ensure that you maintain role-based access to that data, as well as to all this new metadata that you're producing. Make sure that the right people have access to it. Those who need it can see it when they need it, and those who don't can request access in an easy fashion. Along the way, you also need to make sure that you have really strong lineage tracking. One of the keys to successful data governance is being able to draw that line, and we'll actually take a look at all of these pieces today, but taking a look at the visualization of what that lineage actually represents from source all the way through use of that data. And then finally, that last step is actually being able to take a look within your data catalog, find the information you need, but then put it where you need to use it, whether that's within a relational database for data analytics or in a sandbox of some sort for data science purposes. That data needs to get where your users need to actually use it. So this is just one example of a data pipeline, and as you can see, 11 steps along this path. There are quite a number of things that happen along this path, and one of the things that we've found in our experience is that there are just a ton of tools out there that help with each of these steps. And one of the things that sets Zaloni apart from a lot of the other tools out there, and it's a little bit of a philosophical approach to our view of our platform, where we like to cover the entire data pipeline. So from source to provisioning, we offer all of the capabilities that you need to manage that data pipeline. And what that ensures is two things. One, you have a single source of information to provide for lineage. So we're able to track that lineage all the way across the data pipeline. And the second is the governance, and ensuring that governance is happening effectively all across that data pipeline. And at the same time, we still follow that philosophy of being able to connect to the data where it exists so that you don't have to necessarily pull it all into one location and manage all the data access through one location. So using the existing systems that are in place for data storage, data management, data queries, we can supplement that with a data pipeline that provides the governance and lineage you need to see it end to end. So one of the questions we'd like to ask, and Brett's going to start up a poll for us, how many tools do you use to manage your data pipeline? So Brett, if you want to start the poll, and for those of you watching in real time, if you want to vote down below the viewer window.
Yeah, the poll should be going. We'll give you guys, 30, 40 seconds to punch in your answers, and then we'll continue from there. We just need some wait music.
Maybe the classic Jeopardy theme.
Yep. But I'm not singing.
So this is our opportunity here to just jump in and say that, no matter how many tools that you use to manage your data pipeline, there's a combination of not only being able to use a single platform, and I'm going to take you through what we can do within Zaloni to do a lot of automation, but also the ability to integrate across a number of tools. So we have APIs that are well architected to integrate with a number of systems. So let's take a look at the results of that poll. Do we have anything we can share, Brett?
I don't believe so. I didn't see any results come in.
Okay, we'll let those results compile, and we'll move ahead with our conversation. We'll come back to that a little bit later. So let's talk about all of those different systems. What is the challenge that multiple systems cause? Well, there's certainly three primary ones that come to mind most frequently. And all of this really leads to complexity and sometimes even chaos. The conglomeration of disparate tools can be a lot for one organization to manage successfully. So let's talk about the first one, which is that separate tools lead to silos. And what this means is that with separate teams, each managing their own part of the data pipeline, you have someone responsible for bringing data in, you have someone else responsible for data quality, someone else responsible for data governance. You have all these different silos, different teams, different tools, so that anyone trying to actually manage the entire pipeline really has a lot of work to do to go talk to each of those individual teams, understand the tools, possibly integrate with the tools. And so you end up layering multiple tools on top of each other just to solve the problem of too many tools. Ironic, I know. And so one of the things that we'd really like to focus on is simplifying the overall data pipeline. The second is lineage is really hard to ascertain. So lineage is the concept of, every bit of data comes from some other bit of data. So when you're looking at managing your data pipeline and you've got an end output, such as a report, so whether it's a MicroStrategy report, a Tableau report, or even something in Excel, how do you know where that data came from? How do you know and how can you assure how that data has been processed along the way? And in the event that you're struggling to either interpret results in a report or to understand how something has changed with the report, being able to trace the lineage, to go back to the source of the data and troubleshoot a problem or understand the source, that can be very difficult to do. And so one of the things that we do within the Zaloni platform is to maintain that lineage as part of the process. So from the time that the data comes in, through all of the workflows and processes that happen, tracing that lineage is a key value. And then finally, the lack of single governance. And this just really goes back to a very similar point, which is that if you have distributed actions from distributed tools throughout the organization, it just creates an additional layer of complexity when you try and manage your governance of that data. So if you have separate teams responsible for governance and determining the rules as to who can access what data or what data has to change in order for someone to access it, the challenges propagate throughout that cycle. And so we're going to take a look at some specifics in how we can go about managing governance in a single tool. So what I'd like to do now is actually dive into a use case. So I'll introduce the use case first and then switch over to our actual data platform and show you how we can automate several of these tasks. So one of the things that's become very popular lately is from an investment perspective, understanding companies from what they call an ESG perspective, which is environmental, social, and governance. So if you look at any kind of stock application, stock ticker, there's all sorts of numerical data that you can pull down about a particular stock offering. One of the newer sets that's become popular lately are around environmental impact of the organization, their social practices, and their corporate governance practices. And so you can get this information from financial institutions, and a lot of the portfolio managers today are using that type of information to either manage their portfolios in general or to put together specific funds that focus on one or more of those three areas. And so that data comes in and it needs to be made accessible to the people who are going to use it. And it may come from several different third-party sources. The reliability of that data can vary from day to day. It's possible that the information changes. It's possible that the structure of the files change. It's possible that information is missing when it's transmitted. And so there's a lot of workflow that goes into making sure that data is accurate and reliable before it's used by portfolio managers to make investment decisions. So we'll take a look at that data coming in. We'll take a look at how we bring that data into the data lake and catalog it. And then we'll take a look at the profiling and data quality checks that we can do on that data. And then finally, what we'll do is provision it out to a relational database for analytics or reporting purposes. So with that, I'm going to switch over to the application itself. And so for anyone for whom this is their first view of our Zaloni data platform, we hope you enjoy what I have to show you today. I'm going to walk you through some very simple tasks and some example pieces of this data pipeline from one end all the way through to the other. So let's start with the ingestion side. So in this particular case, what we're going to take a look at is actually bringing a file in from a third-party source and bringing it into a data lake. So if I start with the file ingestion, I'm going to show you a very easy application way to do this, and then we'll talk a little bit about the automation. So I'm going to go through and select a file. I'm just going to grab one right off of my desktop computer. But what I want to point out is that we can also set up remote connections. So you can set up remote connections on the server side. We can set up FTP connections. There's a number of different ways to bring files into our platform. So I'm going to walk you through the desktop version because it's the easiest to visualize. And then we'll go back and take a look at some of the file pattern methodologies for picking up files that are dropped or retrieved from an FTP site. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a delimited file. This is a basic CSV file. So we'll upload this file into our data platform. And what we have already is our system has processed the CSV, has taken a look at some of the basic information, and it's providing a very easy way for me to bring this data into my data lake. And so I don't need to make a whole lot of other decisions here. I might want to expand on the business description or business name, make it a little bit more user-friendly. I could say, for example, ESG data from January 30th. All right, so I can put whatever information in here makes the most sense. Continue through the ingest process. We could see that the system has identified the columns from the CSV file, and it gives us the option at the end here if we also want to profile our data. So we have our source coming in, the target data that's going to be populated, and some of the basics we can kick off right out of the gate, such as profiling. So I'm going to kick that off, and it's going to run in the background. It'll get queued up, and the system will process that data. So in the meantime, what I'm going to do is switch over to an existing entity that we have. First, just real quick, I mentioned some file patterns. So when I set up the ability to bring files in an automated fashion, I have the ability to set up file patterns. So for example, this one here, I can take a look at this, and I've said, okay, anything in the test data folder that starts with a certain string, and then I have a regular expression defined here. So there may be any number of digits following the original file path, and it's a CSV file. So what I can do is define a file pattern so that it knows to pick up files on a regular basis, whether that's daily or hourly, whenever I get the data. I can have the system automatically pick up those files and bring them into my system, catalog them, and have them ready for use. So this is the first step in the automation, right? The ability to automate the process of bringing that data in. Again, this is an example of one where I'm pulling the files from a local file system. I can also set up connections, so I can set up a connection out to a FTP system. So as an example here, we have a remote server, so it's got an IP address and port, all the usual stuff you would expect to have on an FTP connection. We support FTP as well as SFTP. So for example, if I set up a remote server, I could choose SFTP, so everything will be encrypted all the way through on port 22. So we have a number of ways to bring that data in. So that's bringing data in. Let's take a look at an entity that we already have in the catalog. And so we'll take a look at the raw data first, and here's some MSCI metrics, again focused on the ESG space. We could see that one of our users has already added some additional tags, which make the information easier to find. And what I'm going to do is take a look at some of the flow that happens here. So if I take a look at ingest history, you can see that this data has been ingested on a somewhat regular basis. But one of the most important things about automation is the ability to see when things go wrong. So if I'm looking here and I say, no data was ingested for several days, that might be a red flag for me to go investigate and see if there's a problem with the feed of the data coming in. Or maybe it's a normal indication that those were non-working days and we don't normally receive data on the weekends or public holidays. So it gives me some insight right away into what's happening in the pipeline. So it's not just about the automation, but it's about the ability to see into the automation and know what's happening in my pipeline. We've talked quite a bit about Lineage, so what I'd actually like to do is show you what Lineage looks like in a very graphical way. So here's our data. This is the source data that we've brought in. And if we take a look, we could see that a process happens, and then we have, it looks like bad data, good data, a report. But I want to expand on the good data. And this is going to get a little bit dense here, but I want to show some of the capabilities of being able to bring data into the platform in a very graphical way. I can now identify what happens with the data. So I can see there's some workflow that happens, then the good data gets processed some more, then it looks like it gets joined with additional data from other sources, and eventually makes its way out into some kind of destination use case, whether that is a database for analytics or sandbox, as I mentioned earlier, for data science. So a very visual representation of Lineage that we can see the entire course of this data. And this really does work in both directions in the sense that I could have started with an output location and traced back to identify the multiple sources that provided information to that destination at the end. So now let's take a look over at data quality. So data quality is key to having good, reliable data. And so you can see we have two types of data quality that's being applied on this data. One is at the entity level. So that's looking at the entire data coming in itself. So we could do things like a record count check. So going back to the original source data, let's say that I normally expect somewhere between 500 and 600 records coming in each day. I could set a record count check and tell it if I get less than 500 records or more than 600 records to send a notification. And what that'll do is ensure that the data I'm bringing in on a regular basis is the data that I expect. And if it's 480 on one day, maybe that's okay, but at least I get a notification and I can proactively look into the pipeline rather than waiting until I get a service call from one of my users saying, I'm trying to see this information and it's missing several companies and I really need this information to do my job. I'd rather be proactive in finding out that there's a problem as soon as we receive that data. The other type of data quality check that we can do is at the field level. So within the file, within the columns of the file that I've brought in, taking a look at the type of data received is another way to validate that the data coming in is what I expect. So whether it's a ticker symbol or a numeric value of some sort, there are a number of different rules that I can apply that will allow me to validate that the data is coming in the format that I expect. Again, there are any number of things that can go wrong, whether it's the source data itself or some kind of processing problem along the way with the file where data gets corrupted. Putting in a check on the data as I bring it in and make it available for my users' consumption, I can make sure that nothing has gone wrong along the way and have a greater sense of confidence in the data I'm presenting to my users. Okay, so let's go back now to the details and take a look at the field level information. And so we can see here there's also additional information provided at each of the fields. So we can really start to get a sense for what our data represents, taking a look at the format, the size. Again, we've tried to bring in as much metadata as possible to make it easy for the users to understand what is this data that I'm taking a look at, what does it mean to me, and how can I use it. So once a user has determined that the data they need throughout this pipeline process is in fact the data they want to use, well, now they need to do something with it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add this data to my cart. And let's say that I'm doing analytics. I may want all the rows and all the columns to be made available for me to use in my report. But if maybe this is a particularly large data set and I don't need all of it, I'm just doing some data science exploration, I might choose a sample set. So I could choose the either number of records that I want or a percentage of records that I want. I could specify a filter, so use some actual query language, choose a field, set some limits on that. In addition to controlling the output at the row level, I can also choose at the column level. So we have quite a few columns here in this data source. I may not need all of these. Or it may be that I'm setting up a data pipeline for a specific type of user who isn't authorized to see all of this information. So I can pull in those columns that are needed. Let's bring in a few here. So we'll just bring in a few columns and we'll save that to our cart. So now that I've set up my data that I want to make available to a particular user, I can go to my cart and actually provision it. So let's go ahead and provision this data. Now there's a number of different ways that we can provision data. We can provision data out to a new entity within our existing data lake, or we can also send it out to a remote server or to a relational database. To give you an example on some of these, if we're going to continue to do additional processing on this data set, we may want to leave it within the Hive environment. If we are going out to something like a Tableau or MicroStrategy or Excel for reporting, then a relational database may make the most sense. Another common use case that we have with our customers is the ability to push the data back out to a remote server. So one use case, and we aren't going to have time to go into depth on this one during today's webinar, is a insurance company that gets multiple files of input from their providers with claims information. They bring that into the data lake, they process it, run quality checks, do a number of other workflow actions. Then they run that against their business rules that allow them to determine whether or not claims should be paid and how much they should be paid out. And then they have to return that information on the payments back to those same providers. And so with this pipeline, they're able to automate that entire process where they bring the data in, run it through all the workflows, and then push the data back out where those providers can then pick up the resulting payment information to understand whether they need to bill their patients for the remainder or if everything has been covered. But today we'll take a look at the relational data example. And I'm going to push this out to a MySQL server. You can see we have support for a number of different relational databases. We'll push it out to MySQL. I've already established this connection, so all the information is pulled in, and I can test the connection to make sure everything's working. This is a real live demo, so hopefully it works. There we go. Connection was successful. All right, so we will now review all of the information here. So we have our details on what we're provisioning. We can see where the destination is, and we will submit that provisioning workflow. And so that provisioning now is going to process, pull the data that I requested, and send it out to my relational or MySQL database. And that's the database that now I can give access to the users so that they can perform any of their required analytics or reporting. So I've taken you through, I know it's been quite a few areas, but what I wanted to do is to demonstrate from end to end the entire pipeline all within one tool. Now there are a lot of areas that we didn't have time to go into more depth on, but we have, in addition to some basic workflows, we also have transformations. So to take a look at some areas here, we have the ability to do aggregations, we can do filtering, joins. So there's a number of transformations that we can actually do on the data. So this starts to get us into some of that lightweight data prep space. We also have, if we take a look at our workflows, the ability to bring in some really incredible, powerful capabilities. And what I'd like to do is just highlight a few of these. So for example, if I take a look at some of my data quality, we can bring in our data quality rules. We can bring in some data profiling. We even have the ability to do data mastering. We can take a look at some specific processing tasks. And this is where our platform really starts to branch out and have some really strong, powerful capabilities, depending on how deep you want to go within the platform itself. So from here, what I can do is I can run code in a number of different ways. I can run code through a custom Java file. I can bring things in through MapReduce or PySpark. I can write Python. I can write shell scripts. So there's a lot of different ways that I can actually execute workflows right from within this platform. And for a lot of our users, that meets their needs on doing the basic processing that they need to do on the data. And if for any reason it doesn't, one of the other things we can do is actually make REST calls. So we have a number of customers that use this to trigger additional actions that do happen in other systems. So going back to the healthcare scenario processing insurance claims, one of the things that you can do is process the core information, the data that you get, then make a REST call to your business rules engine that focuses specifically on claims processing, get the results back, and continue from there. So the platform has a very high level of extensibility in the capabilities around being able to execute specific workflows and code. So I think that's everything that I was going to share in the demo today. So I think we have just a couple more slides to wrap things up. And I will remind you that at any point, if you have any questions, there's a questions window down below the viewer. And I encourage you to ask any questions that you have about automating a data pipeline. Okay, so just to recap, we've talked about the benefits of a single application over a collection of point solutions. We demonstrated how to leverage automation in the data pipeline to improve the overall quality of the data and metadata that you supply to your users, while still applying the right size data governance for security and control. And this reinforces what we started off by saying at the beginning, that we've designed our platform to be a comprehensive solution that does go end to end. And we call this our 3 Cs, our catalog, control, and consume capabilities. And I'll wrap up here with turn it back over to Brett to see if we have any questions.
That's great. Thanks, Matthew. And yeah, like you said, if you have any questions, use the Ask a Question button box tab located just below the player window. We have had a few come in since the beginning of the presentation, so we'll go ahead and dive into those, and if they spark any other questions that you may have, feel free to drop them in that box. But the first one that we got is, can I set how long provisioned data is available?
That's a good question. So when data becomes provisioned, it depends on how you provision it. So there are 3 ways that data can be provisioned today. You can provision it out to the existing Hive data lake. You can provision it to a relational database, or you can provision it out to a remote server. In terms of data controls on that, there are ways that you can, within the workflow, follow up that provisioning with a removal of that data. So when we provision data, we're actually provisioning the data in a way that makes it available within your existing system constraints. So for example, if you provision out to a MySQL database, as we did in the demo, then the MySQL database, it's the system that manages and controls access to that data. So the users that have access within that platform can access the data. But what we can do is automate through workflow the ability to remove that data if it's no longer needed in that scenario. One of the things that we're working on, for just to get into a little bit of roadmap item here, we're working to have some tighter integration with data science notebooks and sandboxes. And as we do that, we're looking at ways to have those sandboxes defined with a specific lifespan. So in that case, the sandbox isn't necessarily an existing database, right? So you're not necessarily provisioning to an existing database where you do lots of reporting or you do other activities. But what we would rather do instead is spin up a new database that's designed to be just part of that sandbox environment. And so we have one customer today that is working with our system to do just that. They are, in fact, using our system to initiate the request that goes through an approval process, and then allows a user to get access to a sandbox, which does have a defined lifespan for that sandbox itself. So there are certainly ways to do that, and happy to chat more with anyone one-to-one if they'd like us to talk more about how we've done that for one of our customers.
Great. And kind of along those same lines, another question is, does the data provisioning update the lineage of a given entity?
Another good question. And I will have to check to figure out which version specifically added that capability. But yes, that is something that, that we've worked on so that when we provision to a database, that provisioning action, so today it does create the additional entity, and what we have the ability to do is to catalog that entity as well so that it shows up as not only part of the catalog, but in that overall flow of the data pipeline. So from end to end, the idea is to capture everything that happens with that data from the first ingestion of that data or connection to that data all the way through to final provisioning and use of that data.
Awesome. Let's see, another one we have is, can I share data sets that have been refined with others in the catalog?
Yes. So there are a number of different ways to share data. So you can share between projects. So let me just switch back for a moment here and take a look at one specific area. So if you take a look, I've got here my project listed, which is responsible investment. And there are a number of other projects also within this instance. So a project, think of it almost like a team that brings together a number of data sets, a number of workflows, the things that you need. There's roles that are associated with a project, so who can do what with the data within that project. So you have the ability to share items from within the catalog with other projects. So from here, for example, if I look at ones that I own within this project, if I choose one of these, I can share this with another project. So a very easy way to add. In fact, one of our customers is using the public project, which is a default project, as a really good way to manage sort of an overall catalog. So no one really has access to do anything but view in the public project the way they've configured it, so that any user can come in and see that data is available, but to be able to go a layer deep or to do anything with the data, they would have to bring that data set into one of their specific projects. So it's a great way to provide that whole inventory of all the data that's available while still maintaining control over who has access to the data. So to answer the question, yes, you can share data and you can control what level of access people have to that data as well.
Awesome. Let's see, I think this might be the last one. Says, if I'm using an existing process for my data pipeline, can I still leverage your catalog and consumption capabilities, or must I use your pipeline process too?
No, there's no requirement to use our pipeline. Depending on what you're trying to do, we do have some customers that focus on using our platform for the ingestion and catalog side of things. If you do that, and actually I'll use a specific example from one of our customers that's looking to enhance the way they use our platform today. So they have a number of processes that happen outside of our platform, and they still want to be able to trace certain activities via Lineage within our platform, even though the actions are happening outside. So we also offer a set of APIs that allow you to specify Lineage records from an external source. And so they're able to manage the data ingestion and cataloging within the Zaloni data platform, but then call the APIs that we provide in order to draw the lineage from those items in the catalog to things that are happening outside of our platform. So it's definitely something that can be done, and we have customers doing that today.
All right, very cool. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's all the questions that we have. If you're watching this and realize a question came up and you want to get an answer to it, just shoot us an email at info@zaloni.com. Same as if you're watching this on demand and have a question, just shoot us an email. And I want to thank all of you for joining this presentation, and to Matthew for taking the time to speak with us today about how automating your data catalog can help bring success to your projects. Again, this was part 2 of the series, so watch the first part, and again, the link is in the attachments tab. And stay tuned for more information on upcoming part 3. This presentation will be available on demand, both on Zaloni's Resources Hub and on BrightTalk for future viewing. And the slides will also be available in the Attachments tab, again located just below the player window. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.